grab an ice-cold can of Celsius Sparkling Kiwi Guava and experience a delicious taste of essential energy. Celsius powers active lives every day with refreshing, fruit-forward flavors and proven ingredients. Find Celsius Essential Energy drinks at a retailer near you or visit Celsius.com to learn more.
Ampire. Hey, babies, 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 babies. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I am on my way down to go see the Army and Navy teams who are meeting for the press availability today, media luncheon kickoff week of the Army-Navy game at Northwest Stadium. Very cool. I'll report back tomorrow on all of that and the festivities down at Northwest Stadium and all the things that are going on this week for one of the great spectacles in sports, the Army-Navy game. All right. A couple things that happened yesterday that I want to get to, and then later on you'll hear me and London Fletcher go through kind of a little bit of a season recap as part of the Booth Review podcast this week through the Commanders. So we kind of just shared our thoughts off the bye week. Obviously no game to review. So we kind of went through all the big moments that got to 8-5. Yesterday, if you missed the show, I went on for a long time talking about all the results on Sunday and what all of them looked like they meant for Washington. And I still kind of feel like if the Commanders go 3-1 down the stretch, it is almost definitive that they're going to get into the playoffs as a wild card. If they go 4-0, I guess they have a very, very small shot at Philadelphia, who would have to lose, but they've got 3 of their final 4 at home starting this weekend with Pittsburgh, and then they end with Dallas and the Giants, and with Dallas essentially eliminated from any real playoff contention last night and losing to Cincinnati. And the Giants clearly having packed their bags, a few weeks ago, it's hard to kind of picture Philadelphia going on a crazy skid. Although the Brandon Graham stuff yesterday was pretty wild, where he outed on WIP, the sports radio station up in Philadelphia, outed that there's a rift between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown, and like the schisms of the locker room are starting to kind of creep up again. Last year, everything kind of went sideways. People kind of blamed Nick Sirianni for it, so much so that both coordinators were changed. And the big storyline of the offseason was, what exactly is Sirianni's job if he's not actually coordinating really either side of the ball? And they gave off this impression that he's kind of like a manager of some sorts or an administrator, but he's not really involved day to day on the coaching part of it, which obviously can't possibly be true. And then the season went along, and Saquon Barkley's having MVP, Offensive Player of the Year type season for them. They have a really good roster anyway. Their defense is way better under Vic Fangio this year. The draft picks have worked out for them. The free agent signing, Zach Bond, has worked out for them. All of a sudden, they have a very good top 10 defense to go along with what is kind of the part of their game that is unstoppable, their offense, the run game portion of their offense. And everything seems to be fine because they haven't lost in, 2.5 months. And then yesterday, Brandon Graham, who's on IR, goes on WIP and says that there's a rift between Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. Brown, I kind of sense, is someone who just wants the ball. And when he doesn't get it, that makes him angry. This started happening last year on the sideline when they were winning, but he was pissed. He is, alongside Saquon Barkley now, their best player and should be getting the ball a lot. It's not happening en masse. They're also winning a lot. They're also running the ball as good as anybody in the NFL, if not better than everybody in the NFL. Best rush offense, outside of maybe Baltimore. So, a win's a win's a win, except up there where you have to win a certain way, or if you start losing, people just start pointing fingers. This is the second year in a row now that Jalen Hurts is literally in the middle of it. Last year, Sirianni kind of got the blame, and people wondered, should he be the head coach? Because, quote unquote, the relationship with Hurts was so messed up with Sirianni that they couldn't, really move forward. And I was a little bit surprised that they didn't actually move away from Sirianni at the time, and they left the setup the way it was, and it felt like a very odd setup, but it's worked out for them. Now we're reaching the point in the season where they need to start winning, and actually not start winning. They need to just kind of coast really into the playoffs and potentially into the division. This has turned out to be really, they're streaking away from everybody. It would take a massive collapse and Washington winning all of their games to even have a shot to lose it. And yet here we are talking about a problem in their locker room again. So short of that manifesting itself enough to where they start losing all their games again, and considering what happened last year, I guess I don't put it past them. And all my Eagles friends and fans are like, you never would believe that they're 11-2 the way they talk about the team. They just don't believe that this group will get it together enough, even though everything suggests that they're one of the 3-4 teams in the conference that could actually get to the Super Bowl. And the way things are going as of now, they could very easily end up getting the 1 seed if Detroit would just lose a game here or there. Like, they've got a real shot. Anyway, I don't see that as the path. Yesterday, I went through the whole thing with all of the teams, and, I kind of landed on, this is all kind of confusing. And if you try to run all of the algorithms on it, you're going to end up at, if you go 3-1 and win 11 for Washington, you're probably in. If you win 2, it's going to be close, and it's going to be largely dependent on a lot of different results. Last night was a good one. Dallas loses to Cincinnati. Not that they were really a factor in this conversation, but they are now officially removed. Washington can officially remove the Saints from any real conversation this weekend, with the exception of maybe, their division if Atlanta and Tampa continue to kind of falter or keep them in the race. But Washington can kind of eliminate them. I think Arizona, it felt like to me, was kind of eliminated over the weekend by losing their second game to Seattle. They're 2 games back of the Seahawks now in their division, so their road to getting the division is very slim. They'd have to basically run the table and hope Seattle falls off and the Rams lose, at least a couple of games as well to even have any real shot. They are playing each other, which is kind of my point. Because when I went and looked back at it, I'm like, okay, I don't love the NFC South schedules, but Washington can control it with Atlanta. If they beat Atlanta, then Atlanta, the most wins they could have is 9. That's just not enough, really, for any real conversation about Washington getting there. If Washington were to win this weekend, and they are going to get a backup quarterback with the Saints, who are under 500 and having trouble scoring points, and Taysom Hill isn't playing for them, he's on IR, et cetera. It's all kind of lined up. I don't want to listen, Dan Quinn don't want to hear about looking ahead to anything, but it's all lined up, and this has become obviously a must for this team this weekend. If they were to win this and they were to beat Atlanta at home a couple weeks later, well, that eliminates them. So for the purpose of this conversation of just doing your business and getting what's done, Atlanta you can remove, which means Tampa winning the division doesn't really matter. The issue with Tampa is because you'd lost to them head-to-head, you won't beat them out in a wild card race if it's just the 2 of you that are tied. If it's not, actually, it gets very interesting because it'll come down to conference record if it's a 3-team race. But let's just say Washington handles their business, beats Atlanta, beats New Orleans. That eliminates Atlanta from being part of the conversation. So really what we're talking about is the NFC West. Obviously, what happens with Green Bay will matter, and obviously what happens with Green Bay this weekend will matter, but because they're playing Seattle. But here's the bottom line as I kind of went through it. The Rams have, Seattle has 8 wins. Let's start there. Seattle has 8. 2 losses by them ends them at 10. That may be enough to win their division. It may not. It probably is more than Arizona. It probably is more than San Francisco. And their game against the Rams in Week 18 could be the difference maker. The reason why I say just winning 2, they're playing Green Bay, Minnesota, and the Rams. 2 of those are at home. The first 2, Green Bay, Minnesota. But obviously Minnesota could potentially win their division. Obviously Green Bay wants to make sure that they stay in the wild card race because, like Washington, their division is kind of out of reach now after being swept by Detroit. These have turned into very, very big games in the NFC for both of the teams. I think it's a win-win either way for us. In either one, if Green Bay wins, they become a lost cause for us the way Minnesota is, and Washington's path probably narrows really to the 7 seed, but it also dings Seattle enough that kind of keeps Washington ahead of the curve on them when it comes to the tiebreak, because Seattle and LA, and this was the good news when I looked through it again, both of them, and San Francisco as well, all 3 of them, and San Francisco would have to run the table to even have a discussion about this, but all 3 of them have a worse conference record than Washington. Washington played none of them, is not playing any of them. The number 2 tiebreak, if it's head-to-head for a wild card, will be conference record, and Washington has a better conference record than all of them. So this will go back. This is a long way of basically saying, let me just go back to where I was, which was I'm very worried that 10's not enough anymore. Thought it was a shoo-in. Now looking at this, short of somehow Seattle and the Rams, I suppose both. If Seattle goes 3-0 and gets Seattle, the most they can get to is 11. Okay, that would be a division win likely for them. If Seattle goes 3-1, that's also 11 for them. The ding would matter who it is, and one of them has to beat each other. So the most the Rams could get to is 11, which means Seattle's most would be 11 as well. This would mean, or Seattle would get to 12 if they were to win out, and the Rams would end up at most at 10. Either way, this kind of reads like the path is there for 2-2 to make it, short of a surprise in the NFC South. However, 11 is going to do it. So I'm going to stick with my prediction. Long way of saying 3-1, they're in. I don't know what seed, probably 7, but maybe higher if Green Bay just takes a ding here or there. And if they get to 10, actually, if you read the road, it looks like they would win via tiebreak by having the best conference record among the group. So it would probably depend how many people are at 11 or at 10 at that point, but we'll see. So if it's only one other one at 10 that's there, like they beat Atlanta, which eliminates them, it's either Seattle or LA that is vying with them. The better conference record for Washington would end up being the difference, and they have that right now. So they would end up getting into the playoffs. Anyway, all right, so there's that. The end of the Cowboys game yesterday. They block a punt after getting a stop in a tie game with 2 minutes to go. And then the punt is then attempted to be recovered by a Cowboys player who then, quote unquote, fumbles it. He never really had it, but it got touched there. Seattle then gets the ball back and gets the ball. This is a quirky thing, and I'm just a rules nerd in the NFL. But where they recovered the ball and where he was tackled was actually not enough yardage to get a first down. The Cowboys player who touched it never fully had possession of the ball and was going forward. I actually don't feel like Cincinnati should have gotten a first down there, even though I know what the rule is, which is after an initial block, if you touch it, you can return it. But if you touch it, it is then a live ball and a quote-unquote change of possession. This was interesting, though. The Dallas player who tried to pick the ball up never really had it. So the ball was blocked. He attempted to recover it. Cincinnati got it. Where the Cincinnati player was actually tackled was short of what would have been the line to gain. So while this may almost certainly never happen again or be extremely rare, a fumble's a fumble on a change of possession. But I wouldn't describe what happened as a change of possession. The ball was blocked. The ball was loose. It was touched by somebody, which would allow Cincinnati to pick the ball up. And then, I guess like what? You can't return it beyond that. If it's blocked and you grab it, the ball is dead. It just stops a return. So I guess I understand the rule. But it was just a touch of a quirk that bothered me when I saw Cincinnati got it. They didn't really cause a fumble. It was more of a deflection or carom off of a player. Once they got the ball, they weren't at the line to gain. This is too football rules nerd. I get it. But there was something off about them getting the ball back there, in my opinion. I think you see what I'm saying. I loved the Simpsons thing last night. I mean, I only saw a bunch of clips. They had Homer go on with the Manning brothers. They did a Stephen A. Smith bit. The pregame speeches by Lisa and specifically Mo, the bartender, thought were really good touches. I loved the starting lineups, which felt very Key and Peele, where they had all the Simpsons characters do the starting lineups of themselves. And then the play-by-play part of it was kind of lost on me a little bit. I'm also, not that I wouldn't have wished that they would have asked me to do something like that, but I thought that part kind of missed a little bit. And the turnaround animation, which I thought very Simpson-y, was pretty good. All in all, I love these. I think they're really, really cool. And I'm glad they're doing them. And I think they should continue to do more of them, these interactions with these, especially like iconic shows like The Simpsons or the Toy Story thing that happened last year. Like, it's just more in for younger audiences. It's not like the NFL needs it, but I think it's just it's just interwoven cultural touch points, meeting up with one another, just kind of validating each other. The Simpsons are maybe the greatest, animated series of all time, certainly the longest running from a television perspective. And American football is the greatest league in this country and maybe the world. And the fact that they're just kind of touch pointing one another just kind of showcases their cultural relevance. So I just hope they continue doing all of that stuff. All right, last thing. I'm not going to play the bite because I've kind of run out of time here, but Bill Belichick went on Pat McAfee yesterday, and I thought it was really interesting because Pat McAfee asked him about North Carolina and college jobs, and because he's interviewing for that particular job. And Belichick's answer about whether he would not specifically take that job, but take a college job as opposed to going back to the NFL was essentially, and I probably should just play him saying it, but essentially he said, I want to go to a place, if I were to go, and he underlined if, because all the insider people believe that he's not doing this and not going to a college job, that he's waiting out going back to the NFL. But if he were to take a collegiate job, he says what he wants the place to be like is a direct portal into the NFL. So he would run a NFL style program with the idea of the recruits who come to play for him are going to be more NFL ready than anywhere else. And he qualifies this with, listen, if they're not good enough, they're not good enough. However, that would be my goal to do this. To which I would say back to him, one, how in the world is that North Carolina, which has a number of pros that have obviously made it, a number of quarterbacks actually in recent years that have obviously made it. But like, you don't think of North Carolina as football factory. That's IMG. Like, what he's talking about is what IMG is for college football. Like, we're going here to become collegiate Division I, high tier Power 4 football players. And hopefully it'll go beyond that, but that's why we're here. This is what we're doing. That's what we're focused on. I don't believe there is a school program that could be IMG of college, which is what he's talking about. Like, Alabama isn't that. And Alabama is as close to it as you could possibly be when Saban was at the helm of it. Texas isn't that. Oregon isn't that, but could be that because of all the Nike money, if they kind of viewed it that way. I don't think what he's talking about actually exists. And it was the first time I heard him say something that I'm like, I don't think you get how some of this stuff works. There's no college that could become NFL factory. You'd have to turn the college into the NFL factory, i.e. what IMG is. So if this is what he wants to be, he should run that. Run IMG, an area like a place where it's only football. The people who are there are high tier, highly selected, and have huge futures ahead of them, and direct them to get to the colleges and then work with them at the colleges to fulfill their dreams at the NFL. The reality of college is the highest bidder is going to get the best players. You're never going to get all of them. And the schools don't function as a football factory solely. The schools function as an entertainment venue for the football team to attract a lot of money, interest, and awareness of the school. So, Bill, I wish you luck finding that, because I don't think you will, and I don't think it exists. All right, anyway, back to the Commanders. London Fletcher next. Bram watch the show. ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
Craven the Hunter, who uses all the methods of the animals.
This Thursday.
Once you're on his list, there's only one way off.
Are you like your father?
He puts evil into the world. I get rid of people like him.
Who's next?
Witness the making of a new Marvel villain.
You think you have some kind of honor? You're a criminal, just like our father.
Aaron Taylor Johnson is Craven the Hunter. Rated R. Under 17 on a minute without parent. In theaters Thursday.
Welcome back. Every week, I have the opportunity to catch up with my booth mate, the great London Fletcher. We do a show called The Booth Review. This week, obviously, was a little bit different as we got together because there was no game to focus on. We were off the bye week. So London and I got into a season review and how we got to this point, 8-5, 4 games to go, and the playoffs very much in play for the Commanders. So here was a segment of The Booth Review. All right, let's get into the Commanders a little bit here. And because it's the bye week, unfortunately, we're off the win. So it's 8-5. There still would be qualifying for the playoffs if the season ended today. They got 4 games left, 2 at home, 2 on the road. A couple of them are under 500 teams. They'll get a rematch of Philadelphia. The Atlanta game is setting up to be a really big game late week 17. Let's kind of set the table here for what some expectations are for the rest of the season. And then I kind of want to just kind of reminisce a little bit here. 8-5. I don't know what your expectations were coming into the season. Mine were about a 500 team. I was hoping Jaden would look the part. They've exceeded my expectations. So I don't know if they're kind of tracking where you thought they would be at this point or what.
Well, during our preseason show, we on the Command Center, we had kind of predictions of wins, and I felt like I believe I predicted them to win. I think it was 11 games, maybe even 12. So they're close to being on schedule with my prediction. And a lot of people thought I was kind of crazy when I said that, but just looking at their schedule at the point in time when we were doing that, I predicted them to win. I think it was about 11 or 12 games. Why? What stood out to you that made you think they would be that good? Well, I just like the obviously the addition of Jaden at the quarterback position. Like the healthy B-Rob, was really bought in on the defensive additions, bringing in Dan Quinn as the head coach, getting Joe Witt Jr. as the defensive coordinator. The way they were going to play football, looking at the track record of Witt and Dan Quinn, knowing that the defense would be a lot better than what they were. So that was a lot of it was based off of that, my belief in them and their ability to get the defense to play a lot better. And I thought also I had Cliff Kingsbury to the offense. The offense would be more productive than it was a year ago as well. Yeah, I liked the setup. I thought the staff was robust and deep, especially on the offensive side of the ball with Kingsbury, an ex-head coach in Anthony Lynn behind him, coaching the running game. Brian Johnson, who had coached at a high level with Philadelphia here as well. And then defensively, we know the reputation of Quinn and Joe Witt for years of getting turnover machines, being able to get pressure, having top-ranked defenses. But you looked like across the board and you went 30 to 35 new players. I know some of them are veterans. We talked a lot about Bobby Wagner last week. Bobby Wagner shows up, Zach Ertz shows up, Austin Eckler shows up. Mm-hmm. But you wonder, is this going to come together? And in the spring and the summer, they were preaching that it had. And in hindsight now, clearly that was true. But I'm not sure I knew it when we entered training camp. Yeah, Bram, that's why, I did and you did. So I guess. No, but it's about a lot of the guys they brought in. First and foremost, they had prior relationships with. So they knew what to expect from these guys from a player standpoint, from a person standpoint, locker room standpoint. You mentioned the Bobby Wagner sign up. I knew he was going to play huge dividends, just not only as a leader, but also from a productivity standpoint. Frankie Louvu, I think he was the top-rated linebacker in free agency, playing down in Carolina. They weren't winning a lot of games, so you don't get a lot of national exposure. Not a lot of people outside of Carolina really knew what he was capable of doing. I thought adding those two pieces, getting Austin Eckler, who he dealt with some injuries with the Chargers last year, but if he was healthy, that run game and what he brought to the table was going to be improved. Making some investments in the offensive line was key as well. So it was a lot of different things that had me feeling optimistic about the roster and what they would be able to do this season.
All right, so let's reminisce a little bit. Let's go through the season a little bit. And I want to start really at the week of the Jets game, which was the first preseason game. And they spent the week, remember, in New York, and they were going to have the joint practice with the Jets. And I kind of thought, like, okay, this is going to be the first real sign. We'll get a chance to kind of see what it looks like. And I think you and I were both like, that practice is going to mean everything because we don't know how much of the starters are going to play in the preseason game and all that stuff. And the practice was a total bust because it poured. And
right.
Aaron Rodgers didn't practice, and we were missing a couple people, and it was so rainy and cold that the whole thing was like a bust. So we get to the preseason game. Jaden's making his debut, and I'll never forget this because in hindsight now, it should have told us everything we needed to know about the guy. He only was allowed to run 3 plays, and on the third one, he changed the play, and he wasn't even supposed to do that, but he changed into the right play and threw a bomb to Bram, and that started the whole week of Top Gun in that whole thing. And that was my first real sign of, okay, this guy hasn't looked like a rookie through camp, and here he is in like moment one showing off he's not a rookie.
Man, that seems so long ago. You take us all the way back to that Jets practice and also that Jets preseason game. I think it says a lot about just his mental capacity, his intelligent football IQ, making that audible at the line of scrimmage based on the look that the Jets were giving him and making that play a perfectly thrown football to Bram. He actually had a play similar to that in the practice before the rain started just really pouring down. That was early in the scrimmage or 7-on-7 part of the practice against the Jets where he hit Diami on a similar type of play. And I believe Diami made a one-handed catch in that practice. But, just that kind of set the stage. We knew about his arm talent, his ability to throw the deep ball, especially against, man-to-man coverage. But what we didn't know is just the type of work ethic he had and, the amount of work he was going to be able to put in and that he has put into to put him in the position that he's in right now.
So then week 2, they did the same thing. They spent the whole week in Florida, which no complaints. Happy to go to Florida for a week. And we had the practice with the Dolphins. And this one, it was boiling outside, but at least the weather was practicable. It wasn't like pouring like it was in New York. And this was a really strong showing specifically on defense. And I remember standing there watching this, and you never know what you're going to get in the preseason because everyone says, oh, they're going to be vanilla. They're not going to show you anything. That's not what the Dolphins did at all. Like, they ran their offense. They were running all of this motion and all these different things they do with all these different players. They have a very unique offense. They put it full on display. And it was my first sign that, because we had a lot of questions about the defense, a lot of new people out there, and who are the corners going to be? Where's the pass rush going to come from? Are they going to have a good solid run defense? And that first practice was the first time that I went, if you could go toe to toe with them at this stage, we're in good shape here.
Yeah, no, with the, you talk about teams being kind of vanilla during the preseason. Well, the Dolphins, under Mike McDaniels, he's been the head coach, I think, now 3 seasons. And people know what their offense is. They know kind of what you're going to get week in and week out for them. So it wasn't a situation where they're going to have to hold anything close to the vest. They're going to have to all of a sudden run out the I formation when that's totally not how they operate and have 2 under center the whole time. This, a lot of misdirections, shotgun, take shots, all kind of, RPOs and zone reads and things like that to mess with you. That really showed you going against the Dolphins really tested the discipline of the defense because of all the misdirection and the pullers and where's the football going to be. Is the defense going to be disciplined enough to be exactly where they're supposed to be, not get caught up in all the eye candy, making sure you're focused on your job at hand. So with that practice, and also it carried over into the preseason games where the guys really had a a nice showing, as you mentioned. And also it was a great work for Jaden in the offense because of the Dolphins defense. They blitzed the heck out of Jaden in that ball game. They were not holding anything close to the best either. They were bringing a lot of 5-6 man pressures, and Jaden, he handled that and he really acclimated himself at an extremely high manner in that ball game against the Dolphins.
The other thing that really stood out about the Dolphins preseason game and the Patriots preseason game the following week, the final preseason game, what really stood out was we were talking about this earlier, how they had kind of preached that this brotherhood was here, that they'd really come together early, that they were all all in on this whole thing very quickly. Yeah. And that really showed on the sideline in the third and fourth quarter, specifically late. Both of those games were really close. And remember, Jeff Driscoll had made a bunch of crazy plays in the Miami game, and they had a chance to win at the end. And the sideline, you could just see them, was so engaged watching it, like wasn't meaningless to them. Same thing happened against New England like a week later. Remember, Trace McSorley had been here like a week because there were a bunch of injuries at the quarterback position. They had to bring somebody in. He trucked some guy from New England. Yes. The sideline's going crazy for him. So like all these like what we deem like meaningless games that don't have, the score doesn't really matter. The sideline was so into it that it was kind of a glimpse. I think it was like a good little peek into the locker room of just how serious they were and kind of in it for one another at that point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And still, we didn't know how strong the bond was and how it was building because of, and that's a credit to Dan Quinn and the culture that he set and getting everybody to buy in, especially when you mentioned how many new guys was on the team at that point in time. Over half I know this was during preseason, so you still were at a 90-man roster. Out of that 90, maybe 50 or no, probably 60 were new guys and first-year guys on the football team. So that says a lot. Credit to him, his coaching staff, to be able to get everybody to buy in. And also a credit to the leaders and the players on the football team too. Like you mentioned, a guy like Trace McSorley who had only been there for a few days, actually before when he played against the Dolphins, he had only been there maybe a day and a half before he played against the Dolphins. And then, the game against the Patriots being there about a week. But for them to embrace him and him to resonate with those guys in that manner, that said a lot and says a lot about their team.
The other thing that really stood out about the preseason to me that did carry over, and oftentimes like you can't take much out of these games, but in this case, I thought it was different for these reasons. Like Jaden kind of showed he's ready to do it. Like right off the jump, like it became obvious that he's ahead of the curve as a rookie. The camaraderie of the team was completely on display. And the other thing that really carried over, I remember, was it wasn't just that Jaden looked the part. Driscoll had these great moments. Mariota looked good in the times that he played. McSorley walks in, and yes, he had a with Cliff Kingsbury, but this is all new, and he was playing well. And what I noticed early was the play calling was getting them into the drives in these second and manageables, third and shorts early in these preseason games. And it totally carried over into the regular season where they were effectively the best offense in the NFL, like the first 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah, that says a lot. It's smart football. You talk about staying ahead of the chains, not having to play on third and long situation, not being in second and long situations, especially with a young young quarterback. You don't want to have him in a ton of third and longs, obvious pass situation. You want to have him in some third and, let's call it 3, 4 or less. Ideally, third and 2 is even better. But the quick game, the no huddle stuff, all those types of things, running a lot. They ran tempo in the preseason, and that's again, that wasn't going to be a shock to anybody who had gone against Cliff Kingsbury's offense. They knew the no huddle was a big part of his offense, and in order to get Jaden ready for the regular season, they had to run it during the preseason. They ran it to perfection, and the quick passing game it served them well. Especially you think about the game against the Tennessee Titans when the offense had a couple games where it wasn't playing the way it needed to play, had to playing behind the sticks a lot, being in a lot of third and long situations. What did they do? They got back to the quick passing game. They ran the ball effectively. B-Rob's first carry goes for 40 yards. So that's what the offense it looks like when it's clicking on all cylinders.
So the schedule read go play a playoff team on the road to open. And so that was a big ask, right, to turn around that. This team was brand new with probably the most overturned roster in the NFL. Rookie quarterback's going to make his debut against a blitz-happy defense that happens to be probably one of the teams that had the fewest amount of turnover. Like they had basically the majority of their team back. It was a tough ask to go down there for their opener. And the two things that really stood out to me was we learned early, like when they came after Jaden, he was going to vacate the pocket. Remember the big story was he ran too much is what everyone was trying to say on the outside. I actually looked at it as maybe, but he already showcased that even under massive duress being blitzed, high percentage of times, he's making the right decision with the ball. Like he's never putting the ball in harm's way. And then defensively, what stood out to me was they needed to just finish at the quarterback, because if they had finished on Baker a couple of times, I'm not sure that the score would have gotten the way that it did. But this was a classic. This team's new and that team's been there, done that, and was in the playoffs. And that's what you get sometimes.
We had I think about 6 opportunities to sack Baker, and he was, I think maybe only got him down once, and he was able to escape. He was more elusive than I thought he would be. The secondary had some communication issues, and that was something that you left that ball game saying, hey, the secondary had some communication issues, and that was something that you left that ball game saying, hey, that needs to be cleaned up as well. In terms of Jaden in that ball game against the Buccaneers, he grew a lot from week 1 to week 2, because in that game against the Buccaneers, there were opportunities for him to throw the football into, take a little bit more risk, so to speak. It was also him getting used to what's considered NFL open and what's considered open in the college ranks, where there were times where he had opportunities to rip it and he didn't do it. He didn't necessarily trust it. And between week 1 and week 2, you saw a big difference. He was ripping those quick outs that he didn't do in the game against the Buccaneers. He was hitting some of those deep digs and things like that he didn't do in the first game against the Buccaneers, where when he left the pocket, keeping his eyes downfield, because there were some opportunities in the game against the Buccaneers. If he kept his eyes down the field, or he could hold the defense up just half a second longer or a second longer and allow him to even create more of a problem running, using his legs. And that was a big ask, like you mentioned, going against Tampa Bay, Todd Bowles and that defense. But it was a lot of growth that he learned from that game, and he carried it over into week 2 against the Giants.
The week 2 game was one of the weirdest games I've ever been around. Like, they kicked 7 field goals, franchise record. They didn't score a touchdown. The Giants scored 3 touchdowns. It was the first of the many weird historic stats that we started getting in the first 6 weeks, where every week we're like, not since World War II, not since 1976, not since this, not since that. This was one of the first ones. Their kicker got hurt on the opening kickoff. So they found out quickly that they couldn't kick extra points or field goals, which mattered late when they went for a 4th down and didn't kick a field goal. Washington walks up and down the field, kicks 7 field goals because they can't score in the red zone against them, win a bizarre game, 21-18. Tressway didn't punt. They didn't score a touchdown. It was one of the strangest. I don't even know how to really think about it now when I think back to it.
Now I was watching that game from home, and the field goals, the offense stalling out in the red zone, and their defensive coordinator, I think is for the Giants, Shane Bowen, if memory serves me correctly. He was outstanding as a defensive coordinator a year ago with the Tennessee Titans, and the red zone defense, I think they may have been number 1, number 2 in the red zone, and he made it tight for us, and then we had some problems, scoring in the red zone, punching it in, and really a couple teams, penalties were also a major factor in that game. But that just think about that. Austin Cyber kicking all those field goals in that game. It was something I guess we didn't anticipate happening, but we were thankful to have him.
That was me and London Fletcher every week on the Booth Review. If you want to hear the full season recap and the bye-week rendition of the show, you can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check it out on commanders.com, the Commanders app, or the Commanders YouTube page. Back after this, Bram Watch the Show, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital. All right, welcome back. I got to revisit the Juan Soto thing, mainly because of how the baseball world is reacting to it, which is obviously this is an utterly ridiculous deal that was made. The salary acceleration is so... how do you even describe this? Like, how does it go from just a couple of years ago that he was offered something over $400 million only to see something that was in the $765 million deal? The Ohtani number, that was absurd based on the fact that he was coming off of an injury. And yes, as a batter, he had an incredible season. And yes, they won the World Series. But how do you account for the number being so high? And like yesterday, I was kind of talking about the Nationals who are just not swimming in this pool. There were a number of teams that were interested in him. I don't believe the Nationals. And I never thought, I mean, you can go check when Cal and I were talking about this, like in the summer when he's heading towards free agency and we'll see where it ends up. And I thought he would just end up being with the Yankees again because the Dodgers had already paid this kind of money to somebody and I didn't think they would do it again. And I didn't know what his number would be, and it would actually surpass what Ohtani got. I never kind of envisioned that, but we knew that the number was $600 million and up. Maybe it wouldn't match Ohtani, maybe it would, but that the Nationals just aren't playing that game anymore. And I found this really interesting because Buster Olney and Jeff Passan from ESPN, who's, obviously their opinions really matter and they follow this sport way, way, way more closely. They kind of laid out that they thought that this was not a great deal. And this was kind of the Mets being the Mets and just a power play by their billionaire owner who had basically burnt money in the past with deals that had been done that didn't work out. And they were in a reset year and they ended up in the playoffs anyway. And then he just turned around off of that and he made the biggest signing in the history of the game. And this is what they said about it yesterday.
Do we really believe that either Brian Cashman or David Stearns is saying to their owner, you know what, it's a good baseball deal to give this guy $51 million when we know he's probably going to be a DH for most of his career? There's no chance that happens. This is all about the two owners.
It's kind of amazing that the Yankees lost out on Juan Soto and might be better off at the end of the day.
Oh, totally. And it's one of those situations where the baseball people, Buster, they look at this and they weren't rooting for Soto not to sign with them. And I'm not just talking Brian Cashman and David Stearns, but, throughout the organizations, they weren't rooting to lose on the Juan Soto sweepstakes, but it didn't kill them all that much. No.
And here's the thing, like, this is not a good baseball deal.
No,
it's just not in the context of everything else in the sport. It is an exceptional overpay, but it also shows you that when a guy is 26 years old and the caliber of Juan Soto and he hits free agency, it's a bonanza. And age, what this has shown me, and I think we knew this, but maybe not to this extent. Age matters more than just about anything. Talent matters, don't get me wrong, but when you can combine talent and age, the world is your oyster.
Yamamoto, Alex Rodriguez, on and on. If you're a young free agent at some point and you have talent, you're going to absolutely cash in.
Okay, exceptional overpay, sure. But the Mets weren't the only ones doing this. And all of the reporting, even from the ESPN people, was that the Yankees were very close to this, that the Dodgers were obviously in the ballpark, and there were other teams that were talking to him, and maybe they bowed out late. I think the larger point is Clearly, teams can afford to do this. And whether you think it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do doesn't really matter. They can. And therefore, the paradigm of the sport, because I want to bring it back to our teams here, neither one of them, I guess the Orioles haven't been tested this way, but they weren't in the Juan Soto sweepstakes. And I guess with their offense and their prospects, I don't know why they would be. So they're a hard test. Like, will they pay an absurd number for the Garrett Coles of the world when they pop up? I guess we'll have to wait and see, because David Rubenstein hasn't been tested this way yet. But the Lerners have. And the reality is, while they didn't get the deal done with Soto a couple of years ago, and they were paying what appeared to be market value or over, and they didn't get the deal done with Bryce Harper, for whatever reasons they didn't get the deal done with Bryce Harper, either they can't close these deals or they don't really want to make them. And these are their generational players that, whether they drafted them or homegrown them, and whatever you want to say about Harper, he's the number one overall pick. He would have been the number one overall pick to anybody. They can't retain them. So while I hear what Passan and Olney are saying about this, I still have a hard time understanding how you can call this a bad deal, the wrong deal, that people are relieved that they didn't have to pay this, because this is the going rate. And if you're the ownership or team or the fans of the teams, you can decry that these type of signings, and I saw Andrew Friedman of the Dodgers had to defend the Blake Snell signing, because they're saying to him, you're ruining baseball because you're just buying up every great player. Well, you're allowed to. The market dictates what people are worth. The Mets weren't the only people that thought Soto was worth something like this. The larger question is, will our team here locally, major market team, ever conceive under this ownership group to believe that they want to pay market value for people? And you can at me with, they did it with Jason Worth, and they acquired Max Scherzer, and they re-signed their guys along the way. But that stopped after the World Series. And their best players, the young guys that Passan's talking about that have this kind of market value, well, they are getting these deals in the open market. So when are we going to ask, does this ownership want to pay the going rate for the best players? And I'm not saying it's the only way to win. It isn't the only way to win. But it's a surefire way of having the types of teams that do contend. And if our team isn't going to play in that sandbox any longer, well, you have to ask the question, will they ever? Why would they? And what paradigm shift would change for them to think about it? So you can analyze and overanalyze the deal that went to Soto, but they weren't the only ones that were willing to do it. There were teams that were willing to do this, and only one of them was going to win, and they can pretend they're relieved by it, but they made the offer knowing that this is what it costs to do business. And I don't know that our home team wants to do business this way. And therefore, whether this is a good thing that this doesn't happen for the Nationals or they got away from things like this, it means that when push comes to shove and they do have a team that does look like it can contend, and I'm not buying this one does currently, but if they ever do get the right mix of players that do kind of come together like that, are they actually going to want to play in that circle again? Are they actually going to want to negotiate with players like this that could potentially make them contend? And I guess I'll have to believe it when I see it, because I don't think they do. And so you can sit there and say the Mets got a bad deal, which maybe they did, maybe they didn't. He looks like a generational player. He's been one for 3 different teams now. But the reality is, at any age, I don't think our team wants to do this. I don't think that they want to play ball that way. And I kind of don't blame them. I don't want to write that check either. But guess what? You're also not going to win very much. Or it appears that you will always be outbid for the people you think will help you win. All right, see you tomorrow. Bram Show, ESPN 630, the Sports Capital.